Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch, and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, the Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. Because there is nothing more I love than hearing from you and hearing your healing. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. Hi, Richie. Thank you so much for coming on the Soul Surgery Podcast. How are you today?
Nikki, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to see you. I am doing really well, thanks. It's a beautiful, beautiful day here in the UK. The sun's finally come out after a good few weeks of hiding away, so it just feels like it's a new land.
Yes, I've been hearing how the sun is starting to come out there, and also life is starting to come out as well for you guys in the UK, and that's such a gift, like the kind of aliveness coming out after such a dormant time. So, I wanted to ask you onto this podcast. I've been inviting people who have places of impact and voices in the world to come on here and speak about surrender. Why? Because I just think there's nothing more powerful than human story. And I just want the listeners to keep hearing over and over again how transformational surrender is, rather than it being a point of weakness or a point of collapse, that actually there are remarkable gifts, unseen, unplanned, unknown gifts that come from the courage it takes to surrender to the moment, to surrender to the process, to surrender to what is. So when I ask you what is the greatest point of surrender that you would want to speak about, what comes to mind for you?
We were chatting a little bit before we started recording here. About some interesting events that happened recently. And at that moment, I was thinking, oh, you know what? That would be a really nice thing to be able to share. But as you started to speak then, something else came to mind. Because for me, I would say the moment I'm about to share with you now is probably the first time in my life where I moved into that very conscious action or awareness of surrender,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that intention of surrender. And that was, God, how long are we going back now? Um, Really, the start of uh, my my work, and you could even say uh, my step into what it is that I feel like I'm supposed to be bringing to this world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was at a time when I was very, very unhappy and not in a good place. There was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things in my life that were not right. I used to work in management consulting. It was my first big boy job out of university. Um, and, after
Wow.
6 years of working in management consulting, um, I was just not in a very good place. I was very, very depressed and very lost and just not sure why I was so unhappy because, and I'm sure this is a very familiar story for many people. On the outside, you have all the boxes ticked, lots of things going
Yeah.
well in your life, and from the outside looking in,
Yep.
but internally it was turmoil. I did not know why. I did not know what was going on. Um, why wasn't I
Mm.
happy? Why couldn't I feel joy? And so it led me to decide, you know what, I need to take some time off from work, time away from my normal environment to be able to clear my head and see what is going on. So maybe space is what would help. And I ended up
Mm-hmm.
taking 3 months off work,
Mm-hmm.
and traveling to Peru for 3 months to work in orphanages in Peru and
Mm.
volunteer there. And when I was uh, on the plane, I think it was from Brisbane, which is where I grew up, to LA, and then it was LA to Cusco. But it was from Brisbane to LA that I was on sitting on the plane, and I was journaling and just writing about all the reasons why I think I'm doing this and all my fears. I was absolutely terrified. This was my first time doing a big solo travel by myself, and um, my heart was beating out of my chest, and I was
Mm-hmm.
having so many doubts and of why am I doing this? This is a terrible idea. This is a waste of time. Um, and then something just hit me, and all of a sudden, almost in that kind of free writing state, I just wrote down something for that actually became the mantra of the entire 3 months that I was away, and it was forget who you think you are.
Mm.
Um, And I wrote this down, and I just remember elaborating on it, thinking, you know what? When you are in your environment where you've grown up, surrounded by the people who have known you your entire life, there is this unconscious pressure to be a certain identity and to be a certain
Yeah.
person, to act in a
Yeah.
certain way and to respond to the people around you in the ways that make them feel comfortable and make them feel like they like they're under control. And for the first time in my life, I had this opportunity to be in a place for a significant period of time where nobody knew who I was, no
Yeah.
expectation of who I might be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember thinking, okay, forget who you think you are, drop all ideas of your own identity and
Mm-hmm.
see what comes up. And every day while I was in Peru, I would repeat this mantra in my head every morning: forget who you think you are, forget who you think you are. And within about 10 days, I started to notice consciously that I was a very different human being to who I actually was in my normal sort of day to day life.
Mm.
And the way I would respond to things would change. I've always loved being around people, but at the same time, I always sort of thought of myself as a little bit shy or a little bit introverted. And all of a sudden, this new energy came out that felt a lot more outgoing and a lot more extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
Even the way that I laughed changed. All these things changed for me so significantly. And it was thanks to really that conscious awareness or that conscious intention of just dropping away these sort of relics of identity that I'd have accumulated over the years that didn't necessarily represent uh, who I really was, or was really in alignment with how my natural state of being.
Yeah.
Um, and it's that for me was an incredible journey, and probably the first time where I brought that concept of conscious surrender into
Mhm.
my life.
That is such a beautiful story. And I'm so glad you started off with that one. Firstly, as you were speaking it, I could really see that moment. And it was just so present and so alive. The moment of the shedding and then the moment of something coming to life that is unknown. And so I have two questions for you. The first question is, as you were stepping into this unknown space, everything is unknown. The environment is unknown. You were in Cusco, so you're in the mountains. The culture is unknown. Nobody knows you there. You've stepped away from everything that it is known. As you stepped into this world and you'd set this intention, did you start to get some insight and some consciousness over who it was, or all the ways in which it was that had influenced you to become the one you were shedding, meaning the guy you'd been at home, the character that had been Richie, working in that job, doing that things, ticking the boxes? As you were in Peru, did you start to get insight and consciousness over how that character had even, where did that even come from?
Yes, yes. I mean, gosh, there were so many layers, and certainly that time in Peru was just the genesis of the slow peeling back of all the accumulation of things. And um, but I think some of the major highlights that I can share from that moment, and even as I've discovered onwards, is um, a lot to do with my relationship with my parents, who
Mm.
I absolutely love and have been very, very lucky to have a brilliant relationship with. We have a very open and loving family. We're all very close. I have two brothers as well, and we a lot of a lot of families from the outside would always say, "Wow, you guys always look so close. You do everything together. You always seem so happy together." And generally we were. And I always felt very loved and supported by my parents. However, at the same time, the uh, you know sometimes people, even though you feel loved and supported by them, don't necessarily or aren't able to show up in some ways that you need them to show up.
Yeah.
Um, and so a lot of my behavior and the character that I sort of became, or at least put on and played in my adolescence and early adult years, was sort of modeling after my dad
Yeah.
in a way to try and win his love and affection.
Yeah.
Um, and his approval and validation from my dad. The work that I got into to begin with was the exact same work that my dad got into,
Of
So
course.
in a way, I was trying to emulate exactly his life path and even model my morals and model my sort of way that I would think about the world and interact with people through him. Um, Dad was away a lot growing up, and so just not necessarily having that interaction just meant that I felt like I had that lack growing up,
Hmm.
which is we've talked about it a lot since then,
Yeah.
and really had some really profound healing moments shared together. Sometimes over a scotch, and talking about things and crying and hugging and doing all those beautiful sort of integrative, sharing those integrative moments.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, but it always ended up being, you know, coming back to and actually more recently, sorry, I've understood some more things around my relationship with my mother and how that's impacted me and how I show up in relationships, particularly like romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a big unpacking on that recently. So it's certainly just a lot of early childhood stuff in particular. And I know that, and I know a lot of people can relate to this, because I think a lot of people who are sort of coming in this world at the moment are feeling something similar. Is that growing up, I struggled with a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
um I always felt like I was alone, and that I became very good at sort of becoming like a chameleon.
Yeah.
So being able to fit in with lots of different groups in different ways. So,
Mm-hmm.
in school, I like to play video games. So I used to hang out with the people who like to play video games. Yet I was quite good at sport as well. So I'd hang out with all the sporting teams that I played with. And then I also played cello as well. So I'd have my musician friends. And so, I kind of would, yeah, transform myself to fit in with these different groups, while at the same time never ever really feeling accepted as myself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there
Mm-hmm.
was always that searching, and it just meant that I became very good at seeing how people are and molding myself around them, which meant that I didn't really know who I was.
Yes. Of course. And really what you're describing is, I speak about this, my book, a whole book is about, is this whole way of being in the world, which is based on survival rather than really living. And the nature of survival is when we're trying to get away from something, trying to get away from the belonging, and then morphing into somewhere or something to get away from someplace. And then that dance of trying to get away from something and get to something is, we call our life, but we're never really in the moment. And as you were speaking, your process, you were never really allowing yourself to be you were trying to get away from the belonging to become someone or something. And that is such a universal phenomenon when it comes to human beings. I would say that most, if not everyone, will identify with that in some form. And then of course we get to the point like you do, and you realize, or you did, when you realize, well, I'm doing all the things, why am I not happy? What's missing? Is this all there is? And and of course that is the beginning, isn't it? Or it's the invitation to be the beginning of the shedding. And the second question that I have for you then is, as you were in Peru and you very courageously took this step, and I suppose it's easier when no one knows you, so you kind of get to play in this nothing, not knowing who I am space. Forget who I think I am. When you were in that space, what came up for you in the process of being in the unknowing? The points, did you have points when you were like, well, who am I then? If I'm not that guy, and I've built my whole life based on that guy, well, then who am I?
That's the question that I think everyone is journeying towards answering, isn't it? Who am I?
Yeah.
The
Yep.
the perennial question that has pinned all the great philosophies of the world. And but I can share that at that time, when I was in Peru, um, I certainly would ask that question a lot, and particularly around not just who am I, but I seem to have always been a very purpose-driven sort of, I guess you could say, individual. Um, the why behind everything
Mm-hmm.
was always more important to me than quite often the what or the how. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think alongside who am I, the question that kept coming up the most for me was, why am I here?
Yes.
Um, and those two questions together are quite juicy, and quite,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a good question now thinking about it. And I still have my travel diary from Peru tucked away, I think in the bookshelf behind me somewhere. And
Amazing.
actually, you're inspiring me right now to go through that diary again and have a read and see what are some of the things that I wrote. Um, but I think probably I became quite comfortable in that unknown that you're sharing. I
Mm-hmm.
almost used this as I'd been so structured my entire life up until that point. I used to have a 10-year life plan of all the different things that I wanted to do and achieve in the coming 10 years. And it used to shift and change like every month. I used to make alterations and thinking that I had that kind of control over my
Right.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I got to Peru and really just allowed myself to surrender into that moment of not knowingness and actually trying purposefully moving into that space, it wasn't just a surrender, it was actually a very intentional, I'm going into that space.
Mm-hmm.
um, when those questions came up of, well, actually, who am I? What is this being that is emerging in front of me as I try and forget the ideas of what I think I am or who I think I am? It was more of just allowing things to organically emerge and just constantly being surprised.
Yeah.
Um, it was really just an invitation for me to be always surprised at myself.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than thinking too much about it or analyzing too much about it, it was just a noticing, a
Mm.
constant just noticing and noticing and noticing.
Mm.
Um, while I was in Peru, I did work with some of the plant medicines local to that area as well,
Mm-hmm.
which wasn't the reason
San
why I went to Peru, but it was something I discovered while I was there. And that
was it
certainly brought up
was it
some
s-
more
was it San
questions around the nature of things.
was it San Pedro that you were working with?
No, it was ayahuasca.
Oh, okay.
So I did
Okay.
a few ayahuasca ceremonies while I was there. That was the Yeah, which was certainly very, very profound. And it
Mm.
had a big, big impact on me. I wasn't one to ever really have worked with any plant medicines or any of your traditional recreational drugs before then. I was pretty straight edge in that way. So to kind of go from very little to nothing to working with ayahuasca for the first time was a big jump and certainly a very big eye opener into
Mhm.
the nature of reality and the nature of
Mhm.
consciousness.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so, so again, it was just a opening into the possibility, rather than trying to overthink it or work it out. You know what I mean?
Yes. What I find so beautiful, Richie, as I'm listening to you, and I'm kind of taking you in and witnessing you, is when you speak about the guy that was very structured and writing the 10-year plan, and you're in the managing consultancy. It's so it's like another world, because when I witness you, you're so in the flow, and you're so in the present moment, and that's how I experience you. That's how I was experiencing you before we even press record. And of course, it makes perfect sense that you discovered the breath, and the breath is what became your work. That the breath is so much about completely letting go and being in the present moment, actually completely dancing and flowing in the present moment. And and I just find that so beautiful, that the 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 medicine for the character that you had been to survive became about being in the present. So when did the breath discover you, or when did you discover the breath?
Very soon after the Peru trip, actually. So, um, coming back to Brisbane from Peru, I decided that it was time for a little bit of a life reset. So it meant quitting work, um, exiting a relationship that I was in for 7.5 years that wasn't really correct for either of us. Um, Selling everything I own except for a suitcase full of clothes and moving to Asia. And
Mhm.
but it was around that transitionary time that my family was given some pretty bad news that my dad was diagnosed with MS, multiple
Mm.
sclerosis, and
I'm
so
so
I was
sorry.
looking for a way to be able to help him. So
Mhm.
researching, just changes in diets and lifestyle changes, alternative therapies, and it was through my research that I came across um, a fellow called Wim Hof, known as the Iceman, uh,
Mhm.
who is probably one of the better known breathwork figures in the world,
Mhm.
and we have a lot to thank for Mr. Hof and everything he's contributed. But if you haven't heard of Wim, he's known as the Iceman because he has over 20 world records all related to cold exposure. So things like
Mhm.
hiking up, nearly summiting Everest, just wearing shorts and hiking boots and nothing else.
Oh
Just a
my
fantastic human being.
god.
And it was through my sort of research that I found an interview with him where he was sharing that he's developed this method, this well-being method that is great for everybody's general health and well-being. But it's specifically really good for people who have autoimmune problems like
Mm.
MS. So that's what caught my attention, and I ended up traveling to Poland to have a retreat in the Wim Hof method and this Wim Hof experience to find out what it was all about. And so I ended up going to this tiny little village in the middle of Poland in the middle of winter, and we did all the crazy things that Wim Hof does. Swimming in ice lakes and hiking around in the snow barefoot in your shorts. It's -3 degrees outside. We climbed the tallest mountain in Poland again, just in our shorts, -19 degrees at the top, and
Oh.
it was a very profound experience in terms of completely restructuring and reorganizing what you think human beings are capable of and what's possible
Mm.
for us. But what was the biggest takeaway for me was actually working with the breath. So every morning before breakfast, we would go into the basement of the hotel we were staying in and would go through these breathing techniques for 30 minutes, 45 minutes or so, and just have these incredibly profound experiences shifting into all these non-ordinary states of consciousness or altered states of being, and people were having all these different sort of reactions. Some people were just moving into beautiful states of bliss and calm and equanimity with things. Some people were feeling very powerful and feeling like they could take on the world. Some people were having cathartic releases of emotion. Some people were having out of body experiences and sort of everything in between. And, that was the catalyst for me to think, oh my goodness, how is this possible that we're doing this just with the breath? And if it's just breathing and it's really that simple, then why doesn't everybody know
Mhm.
about this?
Mhm.
But to cut a long story short, anyway, I came back home and shared the techniques with my dad. Um, so he started doing breathing techniques every day. The easiest way to do a little bit of cold exposure work every day is to take a cold shower every day. So he changed his diet as well. And from that moment onwards, the progression of his MS completely stopped in its tracks.
Wow.
So it was a very profound experience for my family and just made me wonder what else is possible with breath work. And that led me to travel over, I think, 5 different continents for the next 3.5 years, learning from all sorts of different people about the breath and the different ways we can use it and how we can apply it and what benefits it can bring to us. Um, because, of course, as long as you have one working nostril, one working mouth, and at least one working lung, it means that you can use the breath to benefit you in some way. And if
Mm.
over 7 billion people on the planet can learn how to use their breath, um,
Mhm.
we start to shift things and we start to move the
Yes.
needle. So
Yes.
that's how I came into this work.
Wow, that's such a profound story. And also there's a simplicity to it, which is what I think is really beautiful. When you sit with enough people and ask them the same question, and you hear enough stories around the process of surrender, there's a similarity in the process, is that in the shedding of who you thought you were, there was a birthing of something new, and there was a birthing of something so original and happening in the moment, and all the possibilities that were coming to you were appearing in the moment. And our work is to listen and to respond, and to listen and to respond, and through that there's this creation of life, there's this creation of more life and more life and more life. And I just think that is just, it's so simple that we miss it, but it's just so beautiful. And that's what I hear in your story. And actually, I want to kind of wind back to what we started with, because off mic, before I pressed record, I was acknowledging you for something that I saw, I think last week or the week before. I saw a video on social media that our mutual friend Ben posted, and it was of you. I think it was at Wilderness Festival, and it was pouring down with rain, and like seriously raining. And you were there in the middle of the field on this tiny little platform, and no one was really around you, but you were absolutely fully committed to the moment of holding that space. And the aliveness that was coming through you was quite beautiful to witness. And in your commitment to the moment and to leading that session, people started to come in the rain. They started to gather, and it was just so beautiful to watch. Please share a little bit more about that moment with us.
Oh, yeah. It was profound for me in many, many ways. Um, Very briefly, though, just before we get into that, I would just love to really uh, honor what you shared around that rebirthing process. Um, there's a reason why the concept of death and rebirth is a core
Mm-hmm.
pillar in almost any mystery school, in
Yeah.
many of the ancient cultures, ancient traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're right. In some ways, it seems so simple, but of course, there's a big difference between simple and easy, isn't there?
Yep. Absolutely.
And so, even though it seems like a simple process, that it can be very, very, very tricky sometimes to
Mm-hmm.
allow yourself to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so coming back to Wanderlust Festival, in the rain, yes, so the story was that I was supposed to be teaching a breathwork session, a very traditional kind of breathwork session of, everyone who's done breathwork might know it, sort of lying down, breathing in certain ways for 30 to 40 minutes or so. And about 10 minutes into the beginning of the session, the heavens opened. And it wasn't just a little bit of pitter patter, it was a proper torrential rainstorm, which, you don't get that often in London, I don't think. So it was quite interesting that it happened at that moment. And of course, naturally, we're in Battersea Park, so not much cover there at all in the open field. So everybody started to scatter and try and find cover under a tree or in one of the marquees or something around. And at that point, I thought, okay, not sure exactly what to do here. The ideas of maybe just stopping the session came into mind. There were a few very brave souls that were determined to stay there regardless of the rain. So I thought, okay, well, maybe we just keep going as per normal just for those people. And then I just asked for help. I just said
Mm-hmm.
to anything greater than me right now, show me what to do. And then that from that moment onwards, I think I only really remember about 10% of what happened. I just have these little flashes of memory and of images and of vision. But all of a sudden, what I do remember is from that moment of asking for guidance, I all of a sudden was off the stage, walking towards that little platform in the middle of the crowd that you mentioned, starting to get soaked with everybody else and going onto the stage. And I remember getting on the stage thinking, what am I doing here? and then, and just decided, you know what? I'm just going to stay here and teach. And I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to teach, because with this torrential rainstorm, lying on your back and doing breath work doesn't really work. Everyone's just going to get cold or drown. So I kind of just asked everyone who is still here to stand up and come to the stage. And what ended up happening was I just ended up leading some, I don't know what you'd call it. I can barely remember what it was, to be honest with you, but it was some sort of guided meditation, visualization with movement, with sounding and toning. It was a not necessarily something that I'd never really taught before. And as it progressed, just more and more people came and ditched their umbrellas and ditched left the trees and just came into the rain in this act of pure surrender. We surrendered to the elements and went, you know what?
Yeah.
This isn't going to stop us from experiencing this moment. And
Yes.
and so we ended up having, again, maybe, I don't know, probably about 300 people together in this
Yep.
absolutely pouring rain. Just sharing in this profound energy and in this profound experience. And, I think there was definitely something to that moment where everyone made that decision to stay or to come out of hiding and come into the rain. And
Mhm.
that in itself was that decision to surrender.
Yeah.
And what that meant was that the vibration in that field just completely changed, and it became this very raw, very vulnerable, very sort of exposed and open energy, this open field, so that anything that we did just was that much more impactful.
Mm.
And I remember at the end, we finished with just like ecstatic dance. It became a big celebration of what we just shared with each other. Luckily, my good friend Tom Middleton, he's a wonderful DJ and psychoacoustic sound engineer. He was on the decks. So I just told him, hey, Dan, we need to dance. And he knew exactly what to play. And what erupted was this just incredible euphoria, and just seeing everyone's eyes and seeing everybody, a lot of people who have had very, very cathartic moments of release throughout that session in the rain, then being able to just open up an expression of movement and of sound and of their voice. It was just beautiful to behold, and something that I've never experienced in my own life in terms of that unique energy. It was so unique to anything. I mean, I'm teaching breathwork for a long time, but this was very different. And oh god, for me, it felt like a baptism of some kind for all of us in that field.
Yes.
Very profound. Getting goosebumps just thinking and remembering it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling quite emotional listening to it, and I got to tell you, when I saw it on the video, it was electrifying to me. It was so clear to me that it was a moment of pure aliveness, absolute pure aliveness, and we don't get to see that often in the way that we live our lives. And what you just spoke about is what is available for all of us when we are ready and willing to surrender the picture of how we think things should be, and listen to the present moment, and listen to life in the moment. And in that, there's this incredible ability to dance with life. And you guys literally danced with life, the aliveness that moves through us, the aliveness of emotion, the aliveness of connection. And I feel emotional hearing you, because, that is really, that's where intimacy is, that's where connection is, that's where we meet each other. And I truly believe that's where we discover the belonging. That's where we experience that belonging that we're all looking for. It's in that moment. And I just want to acknowledge you for your commitment to the moment. It was so beautiful. And it reminds all of us what it really means to be here, and what it really means to be alive. And that is, I think, what everybody is looking for. So thank you. Thank you so much.
It's it's that aliveness that we're all seeking, isn't it? To be present with in our day-to-day lives. And that aliveness looks different to everybody. But I just feel so much in our modern society that's being lost a little bit, primarily through distraction. There are just so many ways for us to be able to distract ourselves, to pacify ourselves, to pull ourselves away from the aliveness that exists within every moment. I'm guilty of it. I'm sure we all have our own sort of habits and ways of doing that. So that's been a big part of my own process, actually, especially in the last 15 or so months, with the world changing so dramatically. And for myself, going into some extended periods of isolation, is looking at those ways in which I see myself distracting myself, pacifying myself, pulling myself away from the presence of that moment, because maybe there was something uncomfortable there, or maybe there was just something actually that was so ecstatic that it felt like too much to really sit with fully. It goes both ways, it's not just one way or the other. It goes both ways. So but I so agree with you. That's what it felt like in that field, was that aliveness, the incredible intimacy. Even though there were hundreds of people standing together, it just felt like such an intimate moment of human connection and togetherness that just had to be celebrated with a big boogie at the end.
Oh, I wish I had been there. Oh, Richie, thank you. I love this conversation, and I just love sitting with you. And I want to acknowledge you for who you are and the space that you are in the world. You are such a beautiful being. You have clearly such a beautiful relationship with life. And with source, and it's palpable, it's infectious, it's medicine. So thank you for sharing this time with me and with the Soul Surgery listeners.
Oh, no, thank you, Nikki, for your very, very kind words, and would love to reflect that honoring back to you as well, because whatever you see in me is what I see so deeply in you, and your service is so powerful and so impactful. And I wish I could give you a big hug right now, but I hopefully will be in your side of the world towards the end of next year and towards the end of this year and early next year. So maybe there's a way to catch up at some point. But until then, just sending you big e-hugs across the world.
Oh, thank you so much.